Well, yeah, let's get started. Good afternoon. My name is Matt Casey. I'm the Associate Director of Graduate Career Services here at Tufts. And we're thrilled to have you. This is our first of several presentations this semester on skill-based aspects of career planning and management. This one is always a big one. I think it's a critical part of career planning process and securing opportunities. So today we're going to be focusing on resumes, CVs, and cover letters. So I think it's important to recognize from a career planning process, when we start thinking about our careers, we start thinking about career management, we start thinking about how to best manage what we're looking for and what we want to get. In every presentation provided for Graduate Career Services for us is delivering this one, is that we want to make sure that everybody knows that career planning is definitely a process. It may feel nebulous, it may feel disjointed. We want to make sure people understand that everybody falls along a continuum of where they are in either figuring out what you might like to do, or you might know what you want to do, but how do I go get that thing? How do I close the deal? How do I network? How do I interview? And how do I sell myself to land a position? So this conversation today is going to be speaking specifically towards career marketing documents, particularly a resume, the CV, and the cover letter. But wherever you are in the career planning process, know that we have tools and resources and one-on-one coaching and additional programs focus on all of these areas to make sure you are the most prepared for your career now and in the future. So I imagine many of you, when you think about the resume and CV and cover letter process, this may be a sentiment. I can tell you that even doing this professionally, that I often feel this way about doing my own documents. And there's a reason for this, is that resumes are hard to develop, and CVs and cover letters. One of the reasons is it's very much a skill, the ability to synthesize the complexity of who we are into marketing documents that translate that to an audience so they can make decisions on your behalf and hopefully the ones you want. Well, we want to make sure, as our graduate students here at Tufts realize, that we do not expect you to be an expert in any of these things. We want you to be an expert in yourself. And we want to be able to provide you the frameworks and the expertise and the tools and the resources to develop these documents so you can be an expert on the content of what you're doing, and we can help you provide all the frameworks and getting all those things out into the documents themselves. So you don't have to feel like this when you're creating these, and you feel confident in the fact that your document's going to fall to the top of the pile when you're applying for the jobs that you're interested in. Your resume/CV is the most important document you will ever own. This is a quote by Martin Yate, who has multiple editions of the Knock 'em Dead career books, including the resume book. It's something that's been around for more than a decade. And I think this is true, with the caveat that LinkedIn is now becoming close to, but maybe not exactly on par with, the value of a resume and CV. The reason being is that it's a tool that people can access without you having to submit something. There's 700 million people and 20 million jobs and internships on it. So just recognizing for the conversation today is talking about the documents themselves, is that there are other tools to make sure that to get your brand and your documents out to the people that can read them, want to read them, and want to talk with you. So that is how long you have between when a hiring manager picks up your resume and either puts it in the no pile, the maybe pile, or keeps reading it. It's about 6 seconds. That may feel like a scary number of how am I going to get somebody to know about me in 6 seconds. We think this is an incredible opportunity for our students, because if you understand the behavior of hiring managers, recruiters, and how they read resumes, you can craft a document that gets longer eyeball sites on that document and is looking at the information that you want them to see and understands the value that you can create. So instead of it being something that's overwhelming, it's something that can really differentiate yourself and get to the top of the pile for the opportunities that you're seeking. And your resume is a document in CV, and for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to be using the terms resume and CV interchangeably, very much because the documents are merging into a hybrid of themselves. There are still options when academic CVs require 4, 5, 6, 7 multiple pages, where there are specific elements that go into those places. But we have another presentation that's focused on academic and professional CVs specifically, where we'll speak to some of those nuances. But that said, the documents that you're creating are designed to tell a story and create interest. They are a snapshot of you, but they are not limited to just your degree, and they're not just specific to your job opportunities or your job experience. They are and can be a document that shows a holistic approach to you and what you've done, and thinking about the ideas that, it's creating a marketing document designed to get somebody to have a conversation with you. So we think it's important to make sure that self-awareness and understanding about the information that you have about yourself, things you may not have considered to be valuable in the tools, may very well be very, very useful for somebody to read. So we'll go over a little bit later about some of the aspects and content you can put into a document like this. And we'll speak to this more in detail later, but the document is a combination of formatting, content, messaging, and flow. Formatting is how it looks. Content is what you did. Messaging is explaining how you did it. And flow is where information goes on the page that makes the most sense to the reader. And that may be very different from opportunity to opportunity or person to person. Several years ago, there was a recruiting firm that wanted to better understand how hiring managers and recruiters read resumes and glean insights and how they made decisions about which candidates they were going to pursue. So what they did is they took 300 or 400 recruiters and hiring managers and put eye tracking glasses and software on them and had them look at a variety of resumes. And what you see in front of you is a heat map of where the eyes went when they looked at it, at a sample document like this. So the darker the color, the more likely they either looked there and spent more time there. So what they see, from the outcome of that analysis, what they realize is that when people are gazing over this topic and looking at this information, they're seeing 80% of recruiters are looking at the resume, are looking at 6 things: the name, the companies you work for, the titles of your jobs when you work for them, the start dates and the end dates of those positions, and your education. Now, in the absence of tailoring that document to the audience, they're going to read it how they normally behave. We believe that there's modern document creation where they will look at the document the way you want them to read. They're going to see the information that you want them to see first. And that's a more effective way for getting more time for them looking at your document so they can reach out to you to have an actual conversation. And that's the purpose of the resume and the cover letter and the CV. The idea is that they're not necessarily biographies. They don't have to encompass everything about you. They're really marketing documents designed to get you a conversation or interview. So when you start thinking about what can go in, sometimes we're thinking about, oh, we might have missed something that would be great to go in. It's also, does it need to be in to be valuable in the circumstances and the targets you're approaching? So the best resumes are accurate. And this may go without saying, but it's amazing how often small details can be missed, which is why we often encourage individuals to have more than one person look at their resume and CVs before they submit them. Some people are great at looking at editorial aspects of it and spelling aspects. Some people are looking at content development. Whatever, having another set of eyes, another set of experiences to glean insights can prevent small mistakes from preventing your candidacy. Most recently, I heard about a law firm was mentioning how often they found that their law firm was spelled incorrectly on their documents, except including cover letters. So even before you get to the content about how wonderful you are and how appropriate you are for this role, they're dismissing the candidate because the spelling error happened. So just being cognizant of this is helpful. The best resumes are relevant. They have industry vocabulary related to what you're looking for. They are keyword searchable. So there are words embedded within job descriptions that are, especially if you're applying online, They are looking at how your documents match to the profile of the position that they've created. So making sure that the vocabulary of the position specifically, and maybe the vocabulary that's consistent with roles like that, are getting into your document. And resumes and covered CVs with the relevant keywords are much more likely to get found by recruiters and hiring manager. And this is also true of LinkedIn. This is just an example of complexity within an industry. For those of you who might say, I'm interested in working in healthcare. Well, healthcare is an incredibly complex and diverse industry. And this is just an example of, on the left-hand side, it's all practice disciplines, all on, in the clinical side, all areas of expertise. And on the right are settings, is where things are done and how they're done. So when you're thinking about a job opportunity, just because the skill sets might be the same, the location, the size, the context could be very different, and tailoring your documents to those audiences become very critical. One size does not fit all. That being said, the more targeted you are, and when I talk about targeting, I mean being very specific in the focus of what you're looking for. So if you're applying for data analyst jobs, you're applying for market research jobs, you're applying for mechanical engineering jobs, is that the more focused you are in those spaces, the less customization on your resumes. Cover letters are still always customized to those roles. Be that as it may, again, the more targeting, perhaps the less customization that goes into it. But there is complexity, so there's nuance, and everyone's, depending on what you're looking for, you're gonna have to craft things that make sense to the reader in the vocabulary and the context in which they look at it. One of the things I think is a very valuable add to a resume/CV is I think some of the best resumes and CVs have titles to them. So aside from your contact details, and we'll speak to some of the nuances there as well, is that in the absence of a title, what we're encouraging the reader of a resume to do is look through it, however you've created it, orchestrated it, whatever sections are there, and we're asking them to contextualize, we're asking them to do math, like dates. The idea is that by putting a title of a role, in this case, a title of a role that you are applying to. So in this particular, this was a physician assistant role. By putting a title at the top of the page, what you're doing is setting the expectation for the reader of what to find on the page. So they, instead of them looking at a document and trying to draw a conclusion, you can draw the conclusion for them. So you're changing the behavior and the intention and the how they're going to look at that document. I think in a lot of cases, having an executive summary, which is additional information to break down or showcase or amplify your background in relation to the work that can be done, those are specific to each individual and something career services can definitely talk to you with one-on-one about if it works best for your documents. And just one note on this piece is that, there's an estimate that more than 80% of resumes and CVs don't have titles. So think of the convenience you're creating for a reader who may have hundreds of resumes on their desktop or hundreds of resumes or on their computer and then physically in their desktop. Making it easier for them to understand who you are is likely to make it easier for them to contact you faster, to talk to you. And the best resumes and CVs are accessible. Just submitting an application to a specific job doesn't scale and provide you a lot of reach. And for career planning and management, specifically if you're looking for opportunities in a job search or internship search or fellowship search or something else, is that what we want to help you be able to do is make sure, one, it's easy to find you, and when we find you, it's easy to understand what values you can create. But these are just examples of platforms where you could potentially either upload a resume or have content about your background that somebody else can passively search. So LinkedIn has 20 million jobs and internships and fellowships, et cetera. Being able to, and it is the preferred resource for hiring managers to find, evaluate, and hire talent. It's predominantly free, and it's a way to have a profile and content on there where recruiters can look for you without you knowing that they're looking for you. So you could have outreach for jobs you're qualified for without you specifically applying for them. The same with Handshake. For those of you who may not have experience with Handshake yet, Handshake is our employer engagement and student engagement platform. So among the things that it's great for is seeing events, setting up one-on-one appointments, attending career fairs, but it also has a very, very robust job and internship and fellowship search board with thousands of positions and thousands of employers that are also searchable by the employers. So if having your updated resume or CV and cover letter, for example, in your document, they can peruse them on their own and maybe reach out to you. Then there's things like experience.com, which is an example of a large aggregator. So things like Monster or Career Builder or ZipRecruiter, they aggregate positions from multiple sites, but you can also upload your resume and CV and cover letter to these sites and have passive search. Making sure you may consider working with recruiting firms like Robert Half, but there's lots and lots of play. So organizations that have recruiting that are hiring or looking for talent on behalf of organizations. So making sure reaching out to them and they have your documents. Targeted job boards, something like PhD jobs, or there's a variety of them that are available to. So job boards that are customized to the areas of interest that you have and making sure those are accessible, because that's where hiring managers and recruiters are searching talent. So there's a variety of places to make sure is that not only is it great having a document, but having a document that's just resident on your own computer doesn't allow anybody to act. So knowing what your options are that are available can be really, really helpful. So how are resumes and CVs built? So I mentioned before that your resume, CV, is a marketing and branding document showcasing skills and experience and potential. It is purely designed to get you a conversation or so understanding that doesn't necessarily have to be an exhaustive or lengthy or all-encompassing document, is that it's tailored to the respective audiences. And as I mentioned before, there are 4 parts to it. One is format, which I mentioned is how it looks. That's font size and type and margins and graphics. And there's no one size fits all. In fact, there's a lot of creative flexibility to a certain extent in crafting these documents. So you may look differently, it may be easier to read for somebody. There are expectations of certain industries that may want it to look a certain way. Then there's content. This is the big part of the resume. This is what you're doing. It's the pieces, it's the connection, it's who you work for, what you did, where you did it. I mentioned messaging and tone, which falls under content, but messaging is being able to describe things for the audience that makes sense and it's relevant to them. So making sure it's not just documenting facts, but who you did something for, or why you did something, or how important that thing was. How did you measure that thing? So making sure that people can understand there are efforts done and outcomes from the work that's been done. And finally, like I mentioned, is flow, is that there's no one cookie cutter format of putting resume content together. It doesn't have to be contact detail and header and work and then teaching and then publications and then education. It could be in a variety of different orders depending on the story that you want to tell. So again, you're not locked into a particular way to do those things. It is important to remember, particularly if you're using your resume to apply for and CVs to apply for opportunities, is that you're typically writing a resume in response to an open position. Not always, but let's say for this conversation that you are. This is just an example of any position description. This is an actual position from a real place, breaking down what the expectations are. So in a position description, there is information about the work that's being done, the expectations of the work, the qualifications of that work. There's also oftentimes additional detail about the nature of the organization that's breaking down all of the information that they're looking for. It isn't always the case, but oftentimes the most important things, the things that are most interesting or valuable to the person writing the position description come first. So thinking about, you may not have to address all the aspects of this role, but maybe the most critical ones are important. And also be able to be able to speak to qualifications and pieces. Also recognizing is that even though position descriptions are tailored and specific, there is flexibility to them. One of the things, if you're doing job searches and something asks for 1 to 3 years of experience, maybe you don't have 1 to 3 years of experience yet in a professional setting. But this is where the academic experience becomes very interesting. Outside of the academic experience is that the work that you've done in your courses or for professors or in student organizations can be the same skills that are valuable to the organization. So you may have 3 years of accumulated experience directly related to that work, but it might not be specifically in a work setting. So just making sure that even though there's a construct to work from, how you really tailor your document is going to be specific to your expertise, because that's what they're hiring for expertise, experience, and interest. As I mentioned, there's no single perfect resume and CV format. They come in all frames, shapes, and sizes. These are just 3 quick, subtle examples, in no way prescriptive of validating these better than others. It's just seeing like there's just different ways to showcase information. Now, I would consider these to be examples of more standard documents, more traditional, just more sort of words and basic formatting on a page. But one of the things that we're seeing slowly emerging is sort of the introduction of a more visual and graphical resume and CV. There are ways to show information visually in pictures and graphs or other, which oftentimes can be very much easier to reconcile than just reading content on a page. UX and UI design has been a big piece of this. So the transfer or the picture is worth 1,000 words. We are advocates for graphic and visual resumes, but here's the caveat to that, is that they're new, they're emerging, and there's no standardization and very little sort of training, not only for people to develop them, but also to analyze them. So the idea is that, again, so this is where sort of the graphical resumes we were talking about, again, not prescriptive. So then we're sort of thinking about what are the content possibilities. So, we think about what can actually go in a resume and a CV. And I sort of mentioned it's doesn't have to just be, or necessarily often is not just your professional experience and your academic experience. There is, education, there's licensing, there's honors and awards depending on, on the audience you're looking for. Memberships in organizations, activities you've done, and thinking about, it could be leadership opportunities, it could be, volunteer opportunities, it could be community engagement opportunities. So there's a lot of different ways. There's not only is it not just one way to pick content, there's no one way to add, when we talk about flow and sections, you can customize your sections to whatever, to anything you like that's relevant to the work that's being done. So it doesn't just have to be professional experience. It could be, applied academic mechanical engineering experience if the work that you have is predominantly in a classroom setting. But it gives somebody a framework when they're reading your documents of what you've done. So professional activities, publications, posters, patents are interesting. Now, when we talk about, resumes and CVs, they're not biographies. So even when you're thinking about having something, a hybrid, is if you have 40 publications, it's not necessary to have 40 publications in a document. You may have a sampling of 5. You can say that to the audience that you had that this 5 represents a total of 40 publications on these topics. So again, you can frame for the reader how they want to think about information. Professional development, if you've taken additional coursework or certifications, if you've taught, if you've done research, if you've done, there's sometimes a job shadowing. So there's a lot of possibilities, and obviously research activities. The one thing I do want people to remember is that there used to be a guidepost, or the question always been, should my resume or CV be one page. And there used to be a long time ago, the idea is that a resume should have one page for every 10 years of experience. And maybe that was true a long time ago, but the reality is showing you all these content possibilities. You realize is that you may have lots of experience in different areas that are relevant for that job. So what we encourage people to do is let the information guide the length, with the expectation that nearly most of the time, 2 pages is enough. There are situations where it can bleed over, and we can certainly talk about those individually, but 2 pages is not unreasonable, just so you know that you're not locked into this from a hiring manager or recruiting perspective. This is also not a prescriptive document or best practice of aesthetics. But the reason I have this slide up is I just want to call out a couple very specific best practices when it comes to content and things you may consider as you're drafting yours. So one of the things is, having your contact details, and it's something that we may take for granted, but it actually can be very helpful to think about what's useful. So let's say you're applying for a role and you're pursuing or have received an advanced degree, putting your credentials in next to your name, if they're earned and related to the work that you're doing, can certainly be added. One question that's often asked is, should I put my address on my resume? And the answer to that is it depends. My recommendation, at least thought process in this, is that most of the time, I don't believe you need to have your full address on your resume. Having city and state, typically the largest metropolitan area to where you may be looking to work, can be helpful to give the reader a sense of where either you're there or you're thinking about going there. But I oftentimes don't necessarily recommend street addresses for 2 reasons. One is that it is rare that you're getting mail from an employer in any part of the process until after you're hired, or at least close to getting hired. And second, nobody needs to go onto Google Earth and put in your address and see your front door. Now, is it ethical or biased to consider pieces of information that aren't relevant to the aptitude of the candidate applying for? Potentially. So thinking about the fact that not biasing your candidacy by somebody having a perspective on something that's not related to what you're trying to do. So, and you can leave off your city and state if they're not requiring that, because so many applications, in a virtual world, and so many are being submitted online, there's an expectation that candidates are coming from across the globe. And you don't need to write the word address or the word phone or the word email address. Having especially in the US, just having a 10-digit number is fine. You can add the 1 if you like, but the 10 is fine. Emails are important. As you are a student at Tufts, I think it is fine to use your Tufts email address on your resumes as you're applying for opportunities. But when you graduate, having a customized vanity email address, so something to whatever name you like, or a Gmail address is typically the most appropriate, because the idea is we also don't want to bias candidacy, because the idea is that if I see an AOL address in the header, I think of my parents. If I think of Yahoo, I think of me. If I think of Gmail, I think of anybody. So just recognizing the fact that having an email address that's not going to create a level of ageism, which again, not reasonable and not fair, but trying to prevent situations in your candidacy. The last thing I'll say is I'm a huge advocate for putting a custom URL of your LinkedIn. When somebody gets your application, when you submit your resume and cover letter, you no longer have any ownership of it. It's wherever it resides in their databases or on their desks. But from a hiring perspective, for hiring managers and recruiters, the process usually goes like this. If we get your resume and read it, and then likely to read your cover letter, if we are still interested in your candidacy, the next thing we're going to do is go to your LinkedIn profile. And after that, we're going to Google you, and we're going to do it in 5 minutes. So the idea is that, and because LinkedIn is a more dynamic tool, and it has more information to shape a narrative, it has a photograph, which we don't In the US, aside from very unique situations, we don't put photographs on our resumes and CVs. But you're in LinkedIn, it's almost required. You're 18 times more likely to get your profile looked at with a photograph. LinkedIn profiles have summaries where you can frame you as a person more so than just in a targeted document. So just thinking about the fact that we will use that as a tool, and it's also the tool we use to find candidates that we haven't seen before. So I mentioned job title. So we've finished sort of content and contact details. The one thing I'll mention with job title is that there are going to be situations when you don't need it. There'll be situations when you're not actively applying for an opportunity. Say you're attending a virtual job fair or one of our career fairs. This may be a place where you're putting topic areas of interest. So I can look through your document, I can see your education as one thing and what you've worked on, but you can tell me the kinds of things that you're interested in doing. That's a place that may be helpful to do. So it might be market research, data analysts, and quantitative research. Just as so you can give people a framework of what this document might speak to. But again, it's all individualized. And then there's no one executive summary structure. There are sentences, there are bullets, there are hybrids, there are highlights, there are competencies. In this particular case, there's lists of competencies, which I am an advocate for. The idea of competencies are things you can do. So there are things you might take directly from the position description of what they're asking you to do. By listing competencies in some frame at the top, tells the audience that you either have experience with fundamental things that they need, or you have exposure to them. So, and I'll show a couple examples of how those things fit together. So those are other possibilities. I think having a skills and techniques and proficiencies section doesn't have to be. It can be in any place in the document is important. I think breaking out those skills, for those of you who are in clinical roles, perhaps you can have instrumentation. For those of you, there's a number of software applications you use in what you're working on. There are going to be research tools. So it's letting people know that you have a portfolio of skills that might be related to what they're trying to do, and segmenting them out, because that's a lot of times what you're being measured on. Now, from a professional experience standpoint, there's only a couple things I want to mention here. Again, it's catered to everyone's background. Is that I think having the name of the organization, the location, and the dates are important, and having the title of your role. Sometimes the title of your role will not necessarily explain the nature of the work that's being done. Just recognizing that you can customize that title to a certain degree to help a reader understand what that role is. Because if the title could be X and that's how it's perceived within an organization, but it might not directly relate to what somebody else might understand. So just relating to, there is some ability to modify and frame to make sense for an organization. But one thing I would like to add, I think is important for roles, is somewhere either in its own description, or I tend to be an advocate for a one sentence description of the organization that you worked for. So the idea is that if I'm looking at somebody's employment experience or education or research experience, and I see the organization, most of the time, the organizations that we work for are not going to be familiar to other people. They may not be familiar with the geography, they may not be familiar with the business. Not everybody works for a Fortune 25 company that has a more ubiquitous brand. So having a one sentence description of an organization gives somebody context about the work that's being done. Now, the size does not matter. It could be, it's just giving an idea of people of what the role is. Like, for instance, Tufts is a private, non-sectarian R1 research university in Medford and Somerville, Mass. Now, you may care about private or non-sectarian or R1, but the idea is that somebody, let's say you're applying on the West Coast, somebody may be familiar with Tufts, but you're giving them some structure around that. The other thing so think of it hierarchically. So one, it's who you worked for, where they are, when you were there, who they are, then what the role title is. And then, there's a variety of different ways to craft content and bullets. You can have straight bullets about your experience. I'm oftentimes an advocate for 1 or 2 sentences about the nature of the work you did. A lot of times there's an 80-20 rule of like, responsible for A, B, C, and D, worked in these circumstances. And then your bullets are outcome driven. And I know this is a lot of information about a lot of pieces, and everyone's going to be unique situations. But what I want people to realize is we want to make it easy for the reader to be able to synthesize information at a level that they're interested in. So these are ways to sort of frame that structure so people can understand what's helpful to them. One thing I find is helpful is either use full names of months or 3-letter abbreviations. I'm partial to full names of months. So January 2020 to December 2021 there's a professional aesthetic to it. It's not an absolute, but I think having a number, a slash, is a little disjointed and a little bit harder to read. And I don't think necessarily quite as professional as the other options. Education section, just a couple quick highlights. I think it's your most recent education goes first. So let's say it's Tufts. I want to know Tufts. I want to know the location. And then I want to know expected graduation date. And if you don't, and some of you may not know what that is, they're different. You can just, you can put, date to present. Then it's the degree you sought. And if your GPA, and this is just the benchmark, is above a 3.5, you can add it to that section. Now here's the thing. People always ask, should I put my GPA on? The reason 3.5 is an arbitrary benchmark of hiring professionals about academic achievement. It's arbitrary. And in the very nature of becoming a graduate student from a university like Tufts, I believe negates the need for it. So you're welcome to add it, but the very nature of becoming a matriculated graduate student at Tufts, I think validates a variety of skill sets. So use that as a guidepost, but not a directive. And I'll try to keep the education section simple, is limiting the number of information. So if you've written a capstone, a thesis, or a final project, you may write the name of that project and the title of it. It doesn't have to be described. It's just, if you've had a long project that took over a period of time that required a lot of details and expertise, this might be a place to put it. Again, these are all measurable guideposts for creating this document. But recognizing is that we want to be able to get to information simply and easily to make the most sense to the reader. And I'll bring up some examples shortly. Now, at the end of this conversation, I will turn off the record, and I'll be able to answer any and all specific questions you might have about the topic that we're discussing today. Now, here's one tool and resource I want to bring to bear for our conversation for today, because I think it's going to be very helpful for all of us. It's called JobScan. JobScan is an applicant tracking system, the exact same technology that companies and organizations use to filter applications digitally. This is the same technology behind it. This tool is predominantly free, and what it allows you to do is take the content of your resume and the content of a position description, and with some pretty sophisticated AI machine learning on the back end, what it'll do, it'll score your document based on a variety of criteria. I do not recommend spending much time thinking about the actual match score that they provide. I think it's just a general ballpark. What I would consider is the feedback they're providing in the rest of the analysis, because it talks about word count, it talks about degrees, it's going to look at certain requirements of those jobs. But one of the very, very, very helpful aspects of this tool is it does keyword frequency analysis. So it's a great secondary check to make sure if there's vocabulary in the position description that's been articulated once or multiple times, what we want to make sure is that either emphasizing things that you didn't know that weren't featured, like if they were looking for mobile 5 times and you didn't have any, you didn't mention it in your document, it's letting you know that this might be a thing that they care about should you get that vocabulary in the document. Vice versa, you may be using a vocabulary over and over again that might not be hugely desired. So it's sort of measuring it's thinking about how often we use things in the document that make the most sense for the reader. Like I said, I think you get 5 scans for free. It gives a ton of information. There is value in the paid version. It's not expensive. It'll do LinkedIn evaluations and a variety of other tools. So there's some valid aspects there. The other quick thing I'll mention is VMock. We don't have subscriptions to either of these right now, but VMock is a resume assessment tool that looks at your resume in the aggregate, and will score it on 3 different categories, and will actually give you feedback on content. It's going to depend on your background and experience, but just knowing that this is something you can also look up is another diagnostic and development tool, in addition to our own eyeballs and the people that are helping us with what we're doing. So I'm going to move the cover letters and then get into topics, just so to examples so we can see them. So resumes are a moment in time working document. Cover letters are interesting in the fact that they can be difficult to write. There's no one cover letter example. There's no one cover letter format. They come in all frameworks and sizes and context. Again, writing a cover letter is a skill, and we have a variety of templates and resources that can help you shape the narrative. It's just making sure we can figure it, to help you decide what that narrative looks like. So what do the best cover letters do? They are always specifically targeted to an audience. You speak to the nature of the role. You're isolating skills and experiences and interest levels that are directly with what they're looking for, because it's designed to do 2 things: explain why this job, and why right now. And it's so they can determine why would they find you valuable, and why are you interesting, and why should they have a conversation. So it's designed to show your unique value and experience level. And like I mentioned, sort of, this is not something you have to do by yourself. We definitely encourage you to ask, asking for help, especially when you're drafting the first ones. Now, as I mentioned before, the more focused you are, the more similar the roles you're looking for, the less customization that goes into it. But everyone is customized, because every organization wants to feel like this is your primary target, and the words need to reflect that. So what's not in a cover letter? I don't think reinventing the wheel or creating something that's already been created. Like I mentioned, we have frameworks and templates and tools that you can use as starting posts or guideposts to work from. Definitely don't be generic. It's they're focused on you and why you're relevant to that opportunity. And don't forget to proofread, because the same thing as the resume is that, definitely spelling errors, grammatical errors can dismiss the candidacy, based on something other than your capabilities. And we're trying to avoid those pieces. So before we get into specific examples, just mentioning, if you're preparing these documents, prep first. Sit down, walk through all your experiences and elements and styles. And if that's something you haven't done before, we can help you. We can help you aggregate and ask the questions that get to that information. Have targeted jobs in mind. Look at resumes and cover letters and CVs of your peers. Again, we have examples of them, but your classmates are going to have examples. Alumni are going to have examples. So having an understanding of what examples of documents that have worked historically. Definitely being patient is that crafting these documents is iterative. It takes time, and they evolve. So some of you are going to be able to just sit down and knock one out pretty quickly. Some it takes time, and depending on the nature of the work that's being done, recognize that is embedded in the process, and hopefully our job is to help you not get discouraged in that process. And always have someone read your documents, to make sure there's nuances or all those details are covered before it's submitted to somebody who can make a decision. So I'm going to try to bring up some examples. I was just mentioning there's a document on the screen. And imagine you had 6 to 10 seconds looking at this document. So if I shared it with you, just from an aesthetic standpoint, is that if you got this in front of your eyeballs and you had 6 seconds and you're skimming it with your eyes and you're looking quickly like, and I turn this thing off, the question is, how much insight would you glean from this person? And would you know what they're applying for? And I would posit in this case, you might not. Is that it's, I see there's some education pieces, there's a lot of dates, there's some skills and abilities, it's a lot of pages. I don't necessarily know what this person is trying to do. But let's say you had another 6 to 10 seconds to look at the document. So you get to see name pieces. So this document is the same person. And I'm not prescribing the formatting for this conversation, just from an aesthetic of how information is showcased on a page. Is that instead of having to to sift through a lot of detail, and maybe you get the information you want, and maybe you're going to want to read or want to reach out. This is a way of structuring information like, oh, this person wants to be a youth center director. They're giving me some understanding of their background. They're giving me some understanding of their competencies. I can clearly see who they work for. I can resolve dates. I can see highlighted pieces of information. I can connect the dots of information, and I can get into the knowledge of the document, not just the unclear aesthetic of that. So this is just a showcase, and this is, again, it's only for demonstration purposes, but there's no one single way to craft it. Now, and all of these examples will be available to everyone after this presentation. And another example is, so this is actually, for full disclosure, is actually my resume. So when I applied to Tufts with, or at least most of the document. But the idea is, this is an example. I think that it's going to be common to a lot of graduate students like yourselves, is that you're going to have a lot of experience and a lot of expertise in a lot of different places. How do you synthesize it? Like when people look at my document, there's a lot of work experience in a lot of areas. Like, does this guy person want to teach? Does he want to be an entrepreneur again? Does he want to go back into business? Do they want to do something else? So that idea of having some measure of executive summary, this is the kind of idea that I'm sort of mentioning. And with full disclosure, is the last 3 resumes and cover letters that I've used for jobs in my career, I have hired a professional resume cover letter writer. For the very nature is that it's hard to be objective about our own brands. So having somebody that understands best practices structurally and industry knowledge can be very helpful. So, but that idea is that trying to, that executive summary of trying to synthesize pieces of information. So having a list of competencies and maybe having a little bit of bullets of experience and expectations. Again, this doesn't mean it's the ideal document. And it was effective in circumstances in targeting. So, and again, this sort of moves over into some extra pages. But the only other thing I will comment on, which I think can be helpful, particularly in the work that everyone is doing, is that sometimes having some descriptions of the work that you've done, not just bullets, but let's say you've worked in a role for a couple of years, just listing bullets about experiences, you can list a couple sentences about your background and expertise about what the role is. So your bullets are oftentimes focused more on outcomes. So if you're thinking about it from a readability standpoint, if you were reading a candidate's resume, putting yourself in the position of a hiring manager, and you're like, all right, I see with this person, they've worked at this place. What did they actually do? And what did they get out of that thing? And what did they create for that? This is just another example of how information could be showcased in that way. And all of these will be available too. I'm going to share one more example. So there are going to be those of you who may have clinical backgrounds or scientific backgrounds. One of the things that's people try to communicate on a resume is how do I get my academic experience into a document? So this is designed to be sort of an example of showcasing information. You do not have to work in a research lab. This isn't shaped, this just happens to be somebody who worked in a research lab for a university. But the idea is that, let's say I have some understanding of what you did in a breakdown. But you could do aesthetic things, like maybe you did 2 or 3 projects. You don't just have to bullet 10 things that carry all of the stuff that you've done. You can actually frame it for the audience. It's like, oh, project 1 was this. And you may have done 10 projects, but maybe only 2 of them are relevant. That's fine. You can maybe list other pieces. But this is just to demonstrate not only showcasing, how to access technical information, but also the fact of like how to showcase it, how to piece it together. So it doesn't, for somebody that worked for several years in a role, it can make sense out of those things. So this is a ton of information. Obviously, we're here to have a one-on-one conversations, group pieces after about all of this. So just my hope is to get as much information to you as possible about best practices, so we can help you maximize your own tools. I'm going to bring up an example of a cover letter, and I'll bring up something just where example of something that's very direct. Now, with your cover letters, I know we're good, is regardless of structure, more of content, there's no one way to do it. This is an example of a first paragraph that identifies the application to this role and a sentence or 2 about their fit for that role. Then the next paragraph is about their experience and expectations and how it fits for that opportunity. And the third paragraph is saying, I'd welcome the opportunity to have a conversation. So it doesn't have, in this particular case, there doesn't need to be a narrative, or there's not desire to be a narrative. It doesn't have necessarily context. It's just saying, I have the experience and expectation you have. I'd love to have a conversation about it. But to show you something in contrast to something like that, that's very direct. Just wanted to frame this. I'm going to read it. So one might ask, why would a man with a passion for the outdoors, a love of Montana, and a happy marriage in the Mountain West move to Boston, Massachusetts? In my case, it was a commitment to becoming the best healthcare provider possible. As you may guess, being thrown headfirst into the hustle of academic medicine and the tertiary hospital of the East Coast was overwhelming, to say the least, but it taught me a few things. I learned how to think quickly and critically. I can now communicate clearly and concisely. I learned how to push through long days, sleepless nights, and endless testing. However, I've not forgotten the lessons I learned in Montana. When I walk into an exam room, the patient will think that I have all the time in the world. They will never know how busy, stressed, or tired I may happen to be. Sometimes it's hard, but every patient gets an open mind and my best effort. As a new graduate, but I'm a new graduate, but I'm tenacious. I have a strong work ethic, and I take criticism well. I recognize that our training never ends, and will always work hard to further my understanding and improve my practice of medicine. I'm an empathetic healthcare provider, and above all else, I am committed to providing the best possible care to all of my patients. Thank you for your time and consideration. Now, I imagine for a lot of us, this is something that is non-traditional, and it is. It's not speaking to the actual skills of the actual job, but in this particular case, the CV does that. So this is an example of somebody speaking to qualifications and soft skills and trying to make a personal connection with the reader. In this particular case, it was incredibly effective. So the Career Services has a variety of templates and tools that fall along a spectrum of resources that we'll make available along with this presentation to all of you that attended today. So you can see how much room there is to play, with the fact that feel free to use them as you're drafting your own documents. It is our goal is to, we want to help you become the preferred candidates for all the jobs that you seek. And in order to do that, one of the things is crafting documents that are targeted, focused, and relevant. And we have tools and templates and resources to do that. So I hope today was a lot of overarching information, and hopefully maybe some fundamentals or some nuances that you may have not heard before that could be useful in you crafting your document. Appointments are in Handshake and available. You can schedule as many as you like. It really is our goal to make sure that you have everything you need to get to wherever you want to go next. So with that being said, I'm grateful for your time and your focus and your energy, and I'll stop the recording, and I will open up this to questions should anybody have them.